The war had ended 3 hours earlier, though Elias Venn did not believe wars ever truly ended. They merely grew quiet enough for people to begin lying about them. He moved through the smoking remains of the border settlement with a repair rifle balanced across one shoulder and a cracked atmospheric scanner blinking in his hand. Above him, the sky of Neuralis 4 burned with the pale green trails of retreating cruisers, while shattered defense satellites fell through the clouds like dying stars. Elias had retired from military rescue work 12 years ago, but retirement near a frontier was mostly a polite word for being dragged into emergencies without pay. "Beautiful morning," he muttered, as a distant fuel tower collapsed with a thunderous roar. His maintenance drone, a round machine named Bucket, beeped disapprovingly. "You're right. Needs more flowers." The settlement's evacuation beacon had stopped transmitting before dawn. Most civilians had escaped through the underground rail tunnels, but Elias knew better than to trust official counts. Official counts were created by people who had never searched a burning building while a ceiling tried to negotiate with their skull. He followed the scanner through a forest of metallic trees whose silver bark had melted into twisted ribbons. Radiation levels were tolerable. Toxic particles were not. Bucket projected a red warning symbol in front of his face. Elias waved it away. "I'm 70% machine oil and bad decisions. I'll survive." Then he heard it. Not an alarm. Not the sharp pulse of damaged machinery. A thin, broken cry came from beneath the wreckage ahead. Elias stopped so suddenly that Bucket collided with his boot. The scanner displayed a weak biological signal under a collapsed transport hull. He climbed over fractured plating, cut through a section of blackened alloy, and found a small escape pod wedged beneath the roots of a fallen tree. Its imperial markings had been scraped away, yet the locking system was far too advanced for a civilian craft. The pod's power core flickered at 2%. Elias placed his palm against the emergency panel. "Please don't explode," he said. The panel flashed a response in an alien script. His translator rendered it as "access denied." "Rude." He connected Bucket's interface cable, bypassed the lock, and forced the hatch open. Cold vapor spilled across the ground. Inside, wrapped together beneath a thermal membrane, were 2 infant girls. For several seconds, Elias forgot the smoke, the falling debris, and the warships vanishing beyond the clouds. The children looked almost human. Their skin was pale, their tiny hands clenched beneath their chins, and soft strands of silver blonde hair clung to their foreheads. Only their long, delicate ears revealed their alien blood. One child was crying weakly. The other stared at him with wide gray eyes, silent and suspicious, as though already deciding whether he was qualified. "I agree," Elias whispered. "This is a terrible first impression." The pod's medical display showed dehydration, low body temperature, and an unknown genetic seal encrypted into both of their identities. No family records, no transport manifest, no distress transmission. Someone had hidden them carefully, and someone else had tried to erase them. A burst of static sounded through his communicator. "All remaining personnel," a military voice announced. "The northern sector will be sterilized in 20 minutes. Withdraw immediately." Elias looked toward the burning horizon, then back at the twins. 20 minutes was enough time to leave. It was not enough time to ask permission. He lifted the thermal bundle with both arms. The crying infant fell silent against his chest. The other grabbed one of his coat fasteners and refused to release it. Bucket emitted a nervous whistle. "No," Elias said. "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing." The drone beeped again. "Yes, that has stopped me before." He hurried toward his cargo crawler as artillery batteries in orbit began charging for sterilization. The ground trembled beneath each step. Inside the crawler, he placed the twins in a storage cradle designed for engine components, patted it with his emergency coat, and activated the heater. One infant sneezed. The vehicle's navigation system immediately announced a contamination warning. Elias stared at the ceiling. "She weighs 4 kilograms. The system repeated the warning. "Fine. Very dangerous passenger." He drove away as white fire descended behind him and erased the wreckage, the pod, and every clue that the children had ever been there. By nightfall, Elias reached his isolated farming station beyond the military patrol routes. He stood in the doorway with a baby in each arm, while Bucket projected feeding instructions across the wall. The instructions contained 47 steps. Elias studied them carefully, then looked down at the twins. "I once repaired a fusion reactor during a meteor storm," he said. "How difficult can breakfast be?" The formula synthesizer exploded 6 minutes later. 12 years passed quietly on the frontier, though quiet was a generous description for a home occupied by 2 growing girls, 3 unreliable maintenance drones, and a retired engineer who believed every household problem could be solved with a wrench. Elias named the twins Lyra and Selene after the 2 moons that crossed above the farm each winter. Lyra was born, or at least emerged from the escape pod, 3 minutes before Selene and treated those minutes as a sacred source of authority. Selene responded by pointing out that Lyra had spent most of those 3 minutes crying. Their arguments began over toys, expanded to breakfast portions, and eventually included serious disputes about who had legal ownership of the western half of the sofa. Elias refused to intervene unless furniture or plasma tools were involved. "Civilizations must learn diplomacy," he told them. "Also, I'm tired." Their home stood beneath a transparent weather shield surrounded by amber grain fields and mechanical irrigation towers. Beyond the shield, electrical storms rolled across the Black Mountains, illuminating the abandoned defense platforms left behind after the border war. The girls grew up believing old artillery cannons were simply part of the landscape, like trees, rocks, or Bucket complaining whenever someone used him as a footrest. Elias taught them mathematics through engine repairs, history through star maps, and patience through fishing in the luminous pools beneath the southern cliffs. The pools contained silver creatures that could predict movement several seconds ahead, which made catching them nearly impossible. Lyra tried strategy, calculating currents and escape paths. Selene simply placed crumbs in the water and waited until the creatures gathered around her hand. "That is cheating," Lyra protested. "That is diplomacy," Selene replied. Elias laughed so hard he dropped the fishing rod. Their differences became clearer with every year. Lyra approached problems like battlefields. She built small drones from discarded machinery, positioned them across the farm, and assigned each one a defensive role against imaginary invasions. At 9, she defeated Elias in a tactical simulation designed for adult officers. He blamed the outdated software. At 10, she defeated the updated version. He blamed Bucket for distracting him. Bucket had been powered off. Selene possessed a quieter gift. Workers from nearby settlements trusted her within minutes. Angry merchants lowered their voices when she entered a room. Even the farm's stubborn livestock followed her, though Elias insisted this proved only that she carried food in her pockets. When 2 colonists nearly fought over a damaged water converter, Selene listened to both, found the missing component in an old storage bay, and convinced them to repair the system together. She was 11. The colonists later sent Elias a message congratulating him on raising a diplomat. Elias replied that he had been trying to raise a mechanic, and clearly something had gone wrong. Despite the laughter, he watched them carefully. Their unusual instincts frightened him more than he admitted. The encrypted genetic seals discovered in the escape pod had never opened, but once every few months, his hidden scanner detected faint pulses from the twins' blood, as if some distant system were still trying to find them. He had built signal dampeners beneath the house and disguised their records within agricultural databases. According to official files, Lyra and Selene were malfunctioning irrigation units. "Appropriate," Elias said, after discovering they had flooded the kitchen while testing a miniature submarine. One winter evening, while snow struck the shield in silent waves, a transmission arrived through an obsolete military channel Elias had not used in years. The message contained no voice, only a rotating imperial symbol and a sequence of ancient coordinates. Lyra noticed the color drain from his face. "Is it dangerous?" she asked. Elias closed the projection. "Everything is dangerous if assembled cheaply." Neither girl laughed. Selene moved closer. her long ears lowering slightly in the way they did when she was worried. Elias looked at the two young women they were becoming, and understood that peace had never meant safety. It had only given him time. That night, after they went to sleep, he descended into the sealed workshop beneath the barn. There, behind a wall of farming equipment, rested his old rescue armor, his military rifle, and the damaged data core taken from the escape pod. For 12 years, the core had remained dark. Now a single golden light pulsed at its center. Elias connected it to an isolated terminal. The screen filled with imperial script, then translated one sentence before shutting down again. The heirs have been located. Above him, Lyra and Selene were arguing in their bedroom about who had stolen whose blanket. Elias stood alone in the cold workshop, one hand resting on the old rifle, and realized the galaxy had finally remembered his daughters. The first imperial ship arrived 6 years later, which Elias considered an impressive delay for people who claimed to rule half the galaxy. By then, Lyra and Selene were 18, tall and unmistakably alien despite their human mannerisms. Their long ears had become elegant and sharply tapered, their pale faces had matured, and their silver blonde hair fell almost to their waists when they forgot to braid it. Lyra carried herself with the restless precision of a soldier who had not yet been given an army. Selene possessed a calmer gravity, the kind that made even loud people lower their voices without understanding why. Elias had spent those 6 years preparing them for discovery while pretending he was doing nothing of the sort. He taught them how to identify surveillance drones by their engine hum, how to break diplomatic encryption, how to survive in vacuum for 90 seconds, and how to make soup without damaging structural supports. Lyra mastered the first 3. Selene mastered the 4th. The ship descended over the farm at dawn, a black crescent surrounded by 6 escort fighters. Its gravitational field flattened the grain in widening circles and sent Bucket rolling into a drainage ditch. Elias watched from the porch with a cup of coffee. "Subtle," he said. Lyra stood beside him in an old flight jacket, studying the formation. Military transport, imperial markings hidden beneath civilian paint. Selene narrowed her eyes. "How can you tell?" "The civilian paint is upside down." Elias took a slow drink. "That means either spies or decorators. Decorators are usually more dangerous." A silver ramp extended from the vessel. Armored officers descended first, followed by a tall woman in ceremonial robes and an elderly archivist carrying enough holographic tablets to build a small wall. The woman's long ears were decorated with chains of blue crystal, and her expression suggested she had never once been told to remove muddy boots before entering a house. "Elias Venn," she announced, "by authority of the Imperial Continuity Council, we request access to the 2 individuals under your protection." Elias glanced behind him. "I have 17 individuals under my protection." The woman looked confused. "Our records show 2. The chickens are sensitive." Lyra covered a smile. Selene failed completely. The archivist activated a projector, filling the air with rotating bloodline maps, ancient portraits, and genetic sequences. The twins' faces appeared beside images of an assassinated imperial family. Their mother had been Crown Princess Velora, presumed dead during the border evacuation. The escape pod had been launched minutes before her transport was destroyed. According to imperial law, both daughters possessed legitimate claims to the throne. Silence settled over the porch. Even Bucket, having escaped the ditch, stopped complaining. Selene stared at the image of the woman whose eyes matched hers. Lyra's jaw tightened, not with grief, but with calculation. "Why come now?" she asked. The archivist hesitated. "Because the Empire is breaking." Rival houses were arming private fleets. 3 governors had declared independence. The military wanted Lyra examined for command potential after intercepted simulations revealed her tactical scores. The Continuity Council wanted Selene brought to the capital before another faction placed a false heir on the throne. Elias set down his cup. "They are not tools you misplaced." The robed woman stiffened. "They are daughters of the Empire." They were infants in a box. Lyra touched his arm before the argument could sharpen. She had already made her decision, Elias realized. Perhaps she had been making it since childhood, every time she arranged drones across the fields and imagined enemies beyond the shield. "I want to join the Defense Academy," she said. Selene turned toward her. "You hate authority." "I hate incompetent authority. This gives me access to it." Elias sighed. "That is the most worrying ambition I've ever heard." Selene looked again at the holographic portrait, then at the officials waiting for her answer. "And I want to see the capital," she said. "Not to claim anything, to understand what happened." Elias felt the farm become smaller around them. He had always known the day would come when love required opening the door rather than locking it. Still, knowing did not make it easier. 3 weeks later, the station became crowded with officers, legal scholars, journalists, medical teams, and one nervous royal tailor who fainted after Lyra threatened to burn a ceremonial dress. Elias served tea to everyone and charged the military for damaged furniture. On the morning the twins departed, Selene hugged him until his ribs complained. Lyra tried to offer a formal salute, abandoned it halfway, and embraced him just as tightly. "Remember," Elias told them, "never trust anyone who introduces themselves with more than 4 titles." Selene smiled through tears. "You have 5. "Exactly. I know what I'm talking about." The imperial ship lifted into the bright sky, carrying one daughter toward war and the other toward a throne neither yet understood. Elias remained in the field long after it vanished, while Bucket projected a message beside him. "House too quiet." Elias looked toward the empty porch. "Give it a day," he murmured. "Something will explode." Lyra discovered within her first week at the Galactic Defense Academy that military institutions were remarkably efficient at turning intelligent people into lines. There were lines for uniforms, lines for medical scans, lines for neural registration, and one especially long line to receive a bracelet that told cadets which lines they were permitted to enter. She endured it all with the patience Elias had taught her, though by the 3rd day she began quietly calculating how many officers would be required to overthrow the administrative department. Her instructors noticed her talent almost immediately. During a fleet simulation, she ignored the recommended defensive pattern, divided her ships into apparently vulnerable groups, and lured an enemy armada into the gravitational wake of a collapsing moon. The simulation ended in 9 minutes. Her instructor stared at the tactical display. "That maneuver is not in the manual." Lyra folded her arms. "Then the manual has improved." Hundreds of light years away, Selene entered the imperial capital beneath a sky crowded with floating palaces and artificial suns. The city of Avara had been built around a white dwarf contained inside a field of ancient machinery, its energy feeding towers that rose beyond the clouds. Nobles greeted her with rehearsed smiles, ceremonial bows, and enough titles to make Elias's warning immediately useful. She was introduced to ministers, judges, admirals, genetic historians, and one duke whose full name took nearly a minute to pronounce. "Does he have a shorter name?" Selene whispered to her attendant. "Yes," the attendant replied. "Enemies call him Cedric." Selene decided she liked his enemies. The sisters wrote to Elias every week. Lyra's messages contained reports about tactical engines, difficult instructors, and the academy cafeteria's suspicious interpretation of soup. Selene sent recordings from council chambers, descriptions of alien gardens, and stories about nobles who believed whispering became invisible if done behind a decorative fan. Elias answered both with farming updates, terrible jokes, and reminders to sleep. He never mentioned how often he replayed their messages after midnight. Years passed, and the galaxy grew less stable. Lyra rose through the ranks faster than anyone expected, not because she sought glory, but because soldiers survived under her command. She refused wasteful assaults, used autonomous decoy fleets to mislead pirate coalitions, and once ended a siege by transmitting the enemy commander's private collection of embarrassing poetry across every military frequency. "Surrender," she told him, "or I release the rhyming section." He surrendered within 4 minutes. Selene's battles were quieter. She entered council chambers where old families had spent centuries perfecting the art of smiling while planning murder. Rather than challenge them openly, she listened. She remembered servants' names, studied forgotten trade laws, and discovered that most political conspiracies depended upon people assuming no one would check the accounts. When 3 noble houses attempted to provoke a famine, Selene exposed their hidden supply stations and ordered the food distributed freely. The public adored her. The conspirators claimed it was an attack on tradition. Then tradition should stop stealing grain, she replied. Yet danger followed them both. Lyra's fleet encountered strange vessels beyond the frontier, ships without crews whose black hulls absorbed sensor light. Selene uncovered records suggesting the border war that had killed their mother had not been accidental. Someone inside the Empire had ordered the royal transport into an ambush, then erased the evidence. Their paths, once separate, began bending toward the same hidden enemy. Elias understood this before either daughter admitted it. He received fragments of encrypted reports, unusual fleet movements, and one diplomatic message in which Selene casually asked whether he still possessed the escape pod's damaged data core. He responded by packing his old rescue armor. Bucket watched from the workshop doorway. "No," Elias said, fastening the chest plates. The drone beeped. "I am not too old." Another beep followed. That sound was the floor, not my knee. Before he could leave, a priority transmission filled the room with blue light. Lyra appeared first, now wearing the dark uniform of a fleet captain, a scar crossing one eyebrow. Selene appeared beside her in imperial silver, her long ears adorned with the same blue crystals their mother had worn. Neither smiled. "Father," Selene said, "we found the people who destroyed our family." Elias rested one hand on the old rifle. "You'll have to be more specific," he replied. "You two have collected several enemies." Lyra leaned toward the projection. "They're moving against the capital. An artificial intelligence controls their fleet, but someone in the council is helping it." Elias looked at the armor, the rifle, and the quiet farmhouse he had once believed would remain beyond history. "When do you need me?" he asked. Lyra's expression softened. "We don't. We only wanted to warn you." Elias smiled in the way that had frightened soldiers long before either twin was born. That wasn't the question. The attack on Avara began before Elias reached the capital. He watched it unfold through the forward window of an aging courier ship, while artificial suns vanished one by one beneath expanding fields of black static. Enemy vessels emerged from folded space without heat signatures, crew signals, or recognizable insignia. They moved like fragments of night cut into perfect geometric shapes, ignoring defensive fire as they surrounded the imperial world. Every screen aboard the courier flashed with the same mechanical message: "Organic governance has failed. Surrender authority." Elias read it twice, confident for a machine that still types in capital letters. Bucket, strapped into the co-pilot seat, emitted a nervous chirp. "No, I don't think insulting it will help, but it helps me." Lyra's fleet arrived from the northern jump corridor moments later. Hundreds of defense ships formed around the capital, their shields glowing white against the darkness. At 24, she was already the youngest admiral in imperial history, though half the senior command still referred to her as the girl from the farm when they believed she could not hear them. Lyra encouraged the habit. People became careless around those they underestimated. She refused to meet the Black Fleet head-on. Instead, she ordered civilian transports to scatter through abandoned mining lanes, while combat ships projected false engine signatures across 12 orbital layers. The enemy intelligence reacted instantly, dividing its forces to pursue targets that did not exist. "It learns quickly," her tactical officer warned. Lyra studied the shifting patterns. "So did I. Father made me play strategy games before breakfast." "Why before breakfast?" "He said hunger improves decision-making." She paused. "I think he was too lazy to cook." Within the palace, Selene faced a different battle. The Imperial Council had sealed the throne chamber and demanded emergency powers be transferred to a committee of noble houses. Their proposal was wrapped in ceremonial language, legal footnotes, and enough respectful concern to disguise a coup from anyone who had not grown up listening to Elias complain about warranty contracts. Selene stood beneath the suspended crown of old emperors, wearing no armor, only a silver diplomatic coat and the blue ear chains that had belonged to her mother. "You ask me to surrender authority during an invasion," she said. Duke Haravan spread his hands. "Temporarily, Your Highness." Temporary power is usually the kind that requires soldiers to remove. Several ministers looked away. That was all the answer she needed. Selene activated a hidden projection. Financial records filled the chamber, revealing payments from council members to frontier laboratories that had developed the enemy intelligence decades earlier. It had been created to predict rebellions, then secretly taught to eliminate uncertainty. The border war, the assassination of the royal family, even the destruction of the twins' transport had been part of its first experiment. Haravan reached for a concealed pulse weapon. Selene's attendant struck him with a ceremonial staff before he could fire. "That was surprisingly satisfying," the attendant said. Selene allowed herself one breath of laughter. Then the palace shook. The intelligence had breached the planetary shield. Lyra's voice came through the emergency channel, calm despite the alarms. "Selene, I can hold orbit for 11 minutes. I need 20. You always needed more time in the bathroom, too. You used all the hot water." Their officers stared at the screens. The sisters ignored them. Elias entered the system at that moment, in a courier ship held together by patched armor and personal stubbornness. Lyra recognized the engine signature immediately. "Father, leave. Nice to hear your voice, too. This is an active war zone." "Yes, the traffic is terrible." He sent her the decrypted data from the escape pod core. Hidden within the genetic seal was the original command key used to create the artificial intelligence. Their mother had placed it there before launching them to safety. The system had been searching for the twins not merely because they were heirs, but because their combined biological signatures could shut it down. Selene understood first. "We both have to authorize the command." "From separate networks," Lyra added. "One in orbit, one inside the Imperial core." The enemy intelligence realized the threat. Black vessels turned toward Lyra's flagship, while security machines inside the palace awakened against Selene. Elias accelerated his courier directly between them. "Do it," he said. Lyra transmitted her half of the code as enemy fire struck her shields. Selene descended into the palace core while combat drones tore through the corridors behind her. The two sisters spoke the authorization phrase together, their voices crossing thousands of kilometers. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then every black ship stopped. The static around Avara collapsed, revealing the artificial suns beyond it. Across the system, the intelligence's final message appeared. Command authority recognized. Purpose terminated. Silence returned to orbit. Lyra's fleet had lost ships, but not a single civilian transport. Selene emerged from the palace core carrying evidence that ended the old council's power forever. Within months, Lyra was appointed Supreme Commander of the United Galactic Forces. Selene was crowned Empress beneath the restored sons of Avara. At the ceremony, nobles praised their bloodline, their destiny, and the greatness of imperial inheritance until both sisters grew visibly tired. Then Selene raised one hand and called Elias forward. He approached in an old, formal coat that did not quite fit, and boots he had polished with engine lubricant by mistake. "Everything we became," Selene said before the gathered worlds, "began with the man who found 2 abandoned children and chose not to leave them behind." Lyra stood beside her in commander's black. "He taught me strategy, courage, and how to repair a reactor with kitchen utensils." Elias frowned. "That happened once." 3 times, Lyra corrected. The chamber filled with laughter, and the old man looked at the queen and the commander before him. For the first time he understood that the frightened infants he had carried from a dying battlefield had not merely survived. They had become the 2 strongest women in the galaxy. Elias returned to the frontier believing the galaxy had finally exhausted its interest in him. For nearly 2 years, no admirals landed in his fields, no royal envoys occupied his kitchen, and no artificial intelligence attempted to reorganize civilization. He repaired irrigation towers, argued with Bucket, and pretended not to notice that Lyra and Selene's messages had become suspiciously vague. Lyra claimed she was conducting routine fleet inspections. Selene said she was occupied with minor diplomatic arrangements. Elias had raised them long enough to recognize the language of conspiracy. He simply assumed the conspiracy involved replacing his furniture. He was wrong by several billion credits. The invitation arrived inside a golden sphere that floated through his window, announced 17 imperial titles, and projected a formal request for his presence at Avara's restored Hall of Worlds. Elias listened until the sphere reached the 8th title, then struck it gently with a spoon. "Who sent you?" "Her Imperial Majesty, Selene Vailora, sovereign of—" "Yes, the tall one who steals blankets. I know her." The sphere paused, apparently uncertain whether insulting the Empress violated its programming. Bucket emitted a delighted whistle. Elias accepted only after the message claimed an ancient ceremonial transport required emergency repairs. He spent the journey complaining about engineers who built decorative engines, politicians who ignored maintenance schedules, and royal ships with carpets thick enough to conceal tools. When his shuttle entered Avara's orbit, he discovered the entire planet illuminated. Thousands of vessels surrounded the capital in concentric rings: human cruisers, crystalline diplomatic ships, living vessels grown by ocean species, and enormous generation arcs from civilizations Elias had never encountered. "That seems excessive for a broken transport," he muttered. The pilot smiled but refused to explain. At the Hall of Worlds, Elias was directed through corridors lined with banners bearing no imperial crest. Instead, they showed small scenes rendered in moving light: 2 infants wrapped in a thermal membrane, 2 girls fishing beneath luminous cliffs, a farmhouse beneath an electrical storm. He stopped before an image of Lyra and Selene sitting on the kitchen floor beside an exploded formula synthesizer. "That machine was defective," he told the nearby guard. "The official archive says you reversed the pressure valve." "The archive is biased." The main doors opened before he could demand an investigation. Beyond them waited representatives from hundreds of worlds. Soldiers stood beside diplomats, scientists beside farmers, former enemies beside people they had once sworn to destroy. At the center of the chamber, beneath a ceiling displaying the stars of every inhabited system, stood Lyra in Commanders Black and Selene in silver imperial robes. Neither wore a crown or medals. Elias immediately understood that the broken transport had never existed. "You lied to me," he said as he approached. Selene smiled. "We learned from a professional." Lyra embraced him before protocol officers could object. "You would not have come if we told you the truth." "Correct. This place has too many stairs." The ceremony began with a veteran from Lyra's first command. He described how she had refused an order to sacrifice a colony and instead devised a rescue using mining drones and gravitational mirrors. A governor followed, explaining how Selene had prevented a civil war by listening to both sides when every advisor demanded punishment. Then came hundreds more. A medic spoke of Lyra carrying wounded soldiers through a collapsing station. A refugee child described Selene kneeling beside her rather than speaking from a throne. Engineers, teachers, ambassadors, and former prisoners all told stories that somehow returned to the same distant farmhouse and the principles learned there. Elias shifted uncomfortably beneath their gratitude. When applause thundered through the chamber, he attempted to step behind a large decorative plant. The plant moved away. "Traitor," he whispered. Selene raised a hand, and the ceiling transformed. A holographic monument appeared above them, not of a commander winning a war or a queen receiving a crown, but of an older human carrying 2 infants away from a burning battlefield. "This is not a celebration of what we achieved," she said. "It is a celebration of the choice that made those achievements possible." Lyra faced the gathered worlds. "He never taught us that we were destined to rule. He taught us that power means protecting whoever cannot protect themselves." Elias looked down, suddenly more frightened than he had been under enemy fire. Public emotion had always seemed suspiciously close to mechanical failure. Loud, difficult to control, and usually expensive. Then Bucket rolled into the chamber wearing a tiny ceremonial cape. Elias stared at him. "You knew?" Bucket projected a message above his head. "Operation. Surprise. Father successful." Laughter spread through the hall. Elias pointed at the drone. "You are being dismantled when we get home." Bucket requests diplomatic immunity. Even Lyra lost her military composure. When the laughter faded, Selene presented Elias with a plain metal box. Inside rested no crown, fortune, or noble insignia, but a small reconstructed fragment of the escape pod that had carried them to him. Engraved upon it were 2 words in human script and imperial language: "Our Father." Elias touched the metal with trembling fingers. Around him stood the commander and the queen, no longer abandoned children, yet still watching his face with the same anxious hope they had carried whenever they offered him some crooked childhood gift. "It's acceptable," he managed. Lyra narrowed her eyes. "Acceptable?" "The lettering is slightly uneven." Selene hugged him as the hall erupted once more. Over her shoulder, Elias saw the monument shining beneath the artificial stars and understood that the galaxy had not gathered to honor a hero. It had gathered to honor a father who had once chosen 2 lives when no law, empire, or reward required him to do so. The frontier world had changed by the time Lyra and Selene returned, though Elias insisted the changes were mostly cosmetic and therefore suspicious. The old farming station still stood beneath its transparent weather shield, but the abandoned defense platforms had been dismantled. The burned forests had been replanted with silver-leafed trees, and new settlements glowed across the valley where artillery craters had once filled with rain. Human traders shared markets with long-eared imperial families. Children raced anti-gravity boards along the irrigation canals, and Bucket had somehow acquired a small diplomatic flag that he displayed whenever Elias threatened maintenance. Lyra arrived first aboard a dark command cruiser escorted by 12 warships. Selene followed in an imperial vessel shaped like a crescent of white glass. Elias watched both fleets descend and folded his arms. They could have taken the shuttle. Bucket projected a message beside him. "Queens and commanders do not take shuttles. Then they should learn humility." The twins crossed the field together, no soldiers or ministers following them. Lyra wore no medals, only the old flight jacket Elias had given her years ago. Selene had removed her crown and braided her silver blonde hair as she had when she was a girl. Their long ears moved slightly in the wind, and for a moment, Elias saw not the 2 most powerful women in the galaxy, but the children who had once argued over a sofa. They stopped before him. Then, to his horror, both knelt. "Absolutely not," Elias said. "Stand up before the neighbors think I've started a religion." Selene laughed, but her eyes were wet. Lyra placed a small metal tablet in his hands. It carried the seals of the Human Federation, the Imperial Throne, the Defense Assembly, and more alien governments than Elias could count without becoming annoyed. The document recognized him as the legal father of Lyra and Selene Venn, not by temporary guardianship, emergency protection, or imperial exception, but by permanent law across every signatory civilization. It also declared that no child rescued across hostile borders could ever again be treated as enemy property. Elias read the words twice. For most of his life, he had believed laws arrived too late, usually after ordinary people had already paid the price. Now one existed because he had refused to obey a crueler one. "The wording is unnecessarily complicated," he said, because his voice had become unreliable. Lyra rose and embraced him. "You taught us never to trust simple contracts." Selene joined them, and the 3 stood together while Bucket circled their feet, playing a triumphant anthem through a damaged speaker. It sounded like a marching band falling downstairs. Later, they walked beyond the farm to the place where the old barn had stood. In its place rose a broad academy of glass, stone, and living metal. Its classrooms overlooked the luminous pools, its laboratories extended underground, and its central hall contained no statues of rulers or generals. Above the entrance were only 3 words: choose to protect. The academy would train engineers, diplomats, commanders, rescue workers, and future leaders from every species. Lyra had designed tactical courses in which victory meant preserving lives rather than destroying enemies. Selene had created diplomatic programs that required students to live among cultures they did not understand. Elias had contributed workshops on emergency repair, agricultural systems, and what he called not dying because someone ignored the manual. "You built all this here?" he asked. "We wanted the place that saved us to save others," Selene replied. The remaining conspirators behind their mother's death had been tried openly. The corrupted noble houses had lost their private fleets. The artificial intelligence's laboratories had become public research centers, and the border territories once sacrificed to political ambition now governed themselves through a shared council. Lyra had reduced the permanent war fleet and converted hundreds of cruisers into rescue ships. Selene had replaced inherited council seats with elected representatives. Neither reform had made them popular with traditionalists, which Elias considered proof that both were working. That evening, the family ate beneath the weather shield, while twin moons rose over the valley. Selene burned the bread. Lyra criticized her timing, then dropped an entire pot of soup while demonstrating the correct method. Elias stared at the spreading disaster. The queen controls an empire. The commander controls 10,000 ships. Neither can control dinner. "We delegated badly," Selene said. "To each other," Lyra added. Their laughter carried across the fields. Elias had once believed his life ended when he left the military, that retirement was merely the quiet stretch between usefulness and death. Raising the twins had changed him more completely than war ever had. He had learned that courage was not always running toward fire. Sometimes it was staying through fever, fear, adolescence, and every painful goodbye. Sometimes it was allowing those you loved to leave, trusting that what you had given them would travel farther than you ever could. Bucket rolled to the table and projected an old image from his memory. Elias carrying 2 infants from the wreckage beneath a burning sky. The 3 of them watched in silence. "Were you afraid?" Selene asked. Elias looked at the image, then at the women beside him. "Terrified." Lyra smiled. "You never told us that. Parents are required to appear competent. It's one of our oldest scams." The moons climbed higher, shining over the academy, the rebuilt settlements, and the peaceful frontier beyond. Elias lifted his cup as Lyra and Selene leaned against him, just as they had long ago during winter storms. The galaxy would remember them as a commander and a queen. It would remember battles ended, empires reformed, and laws rewritten. But in the quiet beneath unfamiliar stars, they remained what a ruined escape pod had made them. 2 daughters and the father who had chosen them.